At the culmination of the 20th century, the American landscape had been transformed at an unprecedented speed. As centuries of drudging physical labor were alleviated by the rise of the machine, a landscape unique to modernity had been created. Called the American Century, perhaps nowhere else but in the landscape of the American city can this parable of transformation be more well illustrated. As our nation succumbed to the inexorable rise of urbanization, new populations emerged that inevitably required popular amusements. Today's stadiums have reached new pinnacles of technological sophistication and luxury that would have been undreamed of in the 20th century's first decades. And it was the sports, the teams, and the fans who followed them that supplied the impetus involved in the pursuit of seeking the perfect place to see the game. In the West, it was the Greeks who built the first permanent architectural structures to support mass viewing of sporting events. In their lionization of physical prowess in games, they fully realized a ritualized response to centuries of martial culture, and were first in establishing a time-honored tradition of turning athletes into idols. Architectural responses to this ancient fascination with games created a venue that served to unify the urban population of Athens. The most famous of these, begun in 331 BC, was the Stadium of Athens, which was designed to accommodate 50,000 spectators. The development of the amphitheater is a distinctly Roman architectural contribution, as were the sports developed to be seen in them. Foremost in this class is the Colosseum of Rome. It was designed with an oval-shaped game surface constructed of wood, upon which sand, the word for which in Latin is arena, was distributed. Beneath this deck existed a subterranean labyrinth of functional spaces provided for gladiators, animals, prisoners, and support staff. Entering via ticketing, another Roman innovation, spectators walked through corridors of vaulted arcades, constructed of concrete, brick, and stone. The seating configuration with the emperor and entourage closest to the action acted as a symbolic microcosm for the strata of Roman society.
I like this little arena here in the gardens of the villa, without all the boring mob yelling and sweating around you. It's one of the few good ideas of my father.
Combined with the singular nature of Roman sports, such as man-to-man and man-to-beast gladiatorial battles, an environment was created in which ultra-violent spectacle allowed the state to solidify hegemonic social controls by at once fascinating and horrifying the masses. With the ban of pagan games in 391 AD, the day of the permanent installation for mass spectator sport would take a hiatus of a millennium and a half. Thus, the descent into the localism of the European Middle Ages put a stop to these forms of public games and the architecture designed to support them. Baseball, eclipsed in popularity by cricket until the 1840s, was introduced to American life via a British children's game, an activity of batting and base running called rounders. By mid-century, after baseball's codification by the New York Knickerbockers in 1845, it was generally acknowledged that America's game had so originated. Having already witnessed the transformative changes called forth by the Industrial Revolution, cities, especially after the Civil War, increasingly became the central hearth of American culture. Newly developed populations of industrial, managerial, and professional classes gave rise to a type of personal wealth made possible only in a cash-based society, which contributed to the conditions that gave rise to popular sport. Baseball's earliest popularizers were those who realized its untapped commercial potential. It was the enclosing of the field and the building of early wooden grandstands and pavilions that created the architectural nucleus of the ballparks known today. Thus, the commodification of that sport provided the impetus for the eventual professionalization of the game. In the period between 1909 and 1915, many teams built what have come to be known as classic ballparks. Philadelphia's Shibe Park, Boston's Fenway Park, Washington, D.C.'s Griffith Stadium, and Cincinnati's Redland Field share a common architectural heritage with Brooklyn's Ebbets Field, Detroit's Tiger Stadium, and New York's the Polo Grounds. They came into being in the years before the United States entered World War I, an age when people took the trolley to the ballpark, and general social optimism held sway. After the war, and before the stock market crash of 1929, only Yankee Stadium, the house that Ruth built, was constructed for Major League Baseball. Other trends in stadiums were those designed for a resurgent Olympic movement, and the venues erected to support a college version of a little-known professional sport called football. Three cultural currents of that era came together to ignite a new movement of athleticism that would itself reach back into the past, while calling into being a new generation of stadia. The late 19th century fascination with archaeological discoveries in Greece, including that of the site of the ancient Olympic Games, contributed greatly to its revival. By 1896, France's Baron Pierre de Coubertin and his fledgling International Olympic Committee accomplished the formation of the first international games. Held in Athens and coinciding with the 75th anniversary of Greek independence from the Ottoman Empire, the event found support in Greece's Crown Prince and was greatly financed by private contributions. These games were a great success and were attended by 60,000 spectators who watched 200 athletes from 14 nations compete in 9 events of track and field. Thus, a vitalized sense of nationalism, a popular interest in the architecture of the classical period, and a highly vaunted ideal of amateur athleticism contributed to a new international impetus that stimulated the building of stadiums equipped to house mass audiences. Though the subsequent early games struggled for recognition and resided in the shadow of World's Fairs, not even the calamitous events of World War I would extinguish the Olympic torch. The Great Depression had put a serious dent in stadium construction, but hard times called for diversions, much-needed spectacle to distract the collective attention from a condition of general social malaise. The simultaneous refurbing of the Los Angeles Coliseum, originally built in 1924, and of Cleveland's Municipal Stadium and Chicago's Soldier Field, would be hopefuls for the games, had all been constructed in a traditional form that harkened back to Athenian examples. These facilities, built during the relative prosperity of the mid-1920s and initially conceived for track and field, have demonstrated great longevity. Soldier Field, now home to the Chicago Bears, and the Los Angeles Coliseum, which has been revisited for possible use by NFL franchise hopefuls, is now a venerable landmark. And despite sharp critics who argue about its future utility, it is the only facility in the world that has hosted 2 Olympiads, 2 Super Bowls, and a World Series. Notre Dame Stadium, with an oval shape similar to many in the Ivy League, was partially blueprinted by famed coach Knute Rockne and made famous by his teams of the 1920s. Coinciding with the rise of radio broadcasting and increasing national distribution of sporting news, these trends planted the seeds that later contributed to the rise of what was then known as a postgraduate game. In 1924, Red Grange, soon known as the Galloping Ghost, signed on with George Halas's Chicago Bears for a whirlwind road trip that acted as a catalyst for drawing overcapacity crowds, including 65,000 spectators that flooded the Polo Grounds, a feat that is credited with saving the then financially insolvent New York Giants. With sightlines all wrong for the rectilinear sport, NFL games and championships were played in such places as the hallowed confines of Wrigley Field, Griffith Stadium, and St. Louis's Sportsman's Park, as well as upon the fields of Olympic venues. The post-war return of human and economic resources combined to create the climate in which the sport of football was popularly reassessed. But it wasn't until the 1950s that stadiums began to be built with pro football in mind. With innovative new coaching, furthered by George Halas and Cleveland's Paul Brown, the game began to take on its primary forms as recognized today. The development of the passing game, with an explosive star player such as running back Jim Brown, and legendary quarterbacks like Norm Van Brocklin, Otto Graham, and Johnny Unitas, the game experienced its golden decade. Ironically, football teams continued to play as secondary tenants in venues designed for baseball. With the exception of Green Bay's Lambeau Field, an anomaly in the general pattern of the era, it would be more than a decade before most football teams found markets responsive to tailoring facilities to their sport.
I would say that in this little six-pack are 6 delightful cans of Burger beer with the aluminum soft top easy open can, and meaning this has the little pull tab top that you understand so well. But such a handy, convenient package to carry. Such a nice little thing to pack in a shopping basket. Such a nice can to open. Such delightful beer to sample and drink. Such refreshment in delightful, sparkle brewed Burger beer.
Television as a medium had come of age by the late 1950s, and it was television's galvanizing power, following a dynamic decade overshadowed by Lombardi's Packers, that football began its mercurial rise. It wasn't television alone and its delivery of new audiences that created football's preeminence, but another modern invention that also impacted the game and culture: the rise of the automobile and the subsequent post-war buildup of suburbia put a serious crimp in the viability of streetcar ballparks like Ebbets Field, which, though considered a near shrine in Brooklyn, had by the end of the decade become untenable to its owners. As the primacy of the need for parking became an ever more apparent consideration, Walter O'Malley, tempted by the lure of the untapped markets of Southern California, took the Dodgers from their ancestral home. In time, other teams would follow this lead, and with the advent of Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles, San Francisco's Candlestick Park, and suburban Shea Stadium for the Mets, it signaled the end of baseball's golden decades. The mid-1960s saw the construction of a giant experiment, Texas style. Hailed as the 8th wonder of the world, Houston's millionaire entrepreneur Judge Roy Hoffines spearheaded the construction of the Harris County Dome Stadium, later named for its premier team, the Astrodome. Originally built with extensive outlays of glass panel roof emplacements, the overall visual impact proved a bit too dazzling to some of the property's most important users. A glare was created that caused outfielders to lose sight of the ball, and concerned parties soon realized something had to be done. Painting out the glass was a relatively easy answer to the dilemma. But how to field a team without the ability to grow grass demanded some high-tech solutions. AstroTurf, a surfacing developed to solve this problem, brought its own set of drawbacks. Though originally hailed as a brilliant step forward and adopted by many facilities that followed, it has long been controversial. The Skybox, a design idea that arose as a response to leftover spaces in the upper decks, were utilized by Hofheinz to create private places for elite audiences. The decade after its completion in 1965 witnessed the greatest period in the completion of domes. These included the Louisiana Superdome in 1975, and a year later, the Seattle Kingdome. Later innovations, such as further refinements in dome roofing systems, including air-supported structures and newly developed semi-opaque membranes, such as that provided for the Indianapolis Hoosier Dome, facilitated a decreased sensation of interiority, while in addition to housing football, provided cover for a myriad of special events, such as the hosting of the 1984 NBA All-American team versus the U.S. Olympic squad. The next logical step in the development of domed stadiums was conceived for Toronto, where inclement weather posed serious limitations to year-round sport. Designed to rotate along steel tracks, the dome roof has 4 movable parts operated by 54 separate motorized mechanisms. Ironically, its first scheduled public opening occurred during a rainstorm. But the marvel of the engineering wonder and the city's expectations were so high that no amount of rain could quell their enthusiasm. Running concurrently with the advent of the dome was the design and realization of the multi-purpose stadium, built to accommodate both baseball and football in the 1960s and 1970s. The new multi-purpose stadiums, seemingly generic in their overall sameness, excited contemporary audiences with their stark modernity.
Cincinnati's Riverfront Stadium, 1974, where baseball's most exciting team brought out over 2 million happy fans, more than half of them between the ages of 18 to 49. But young or old, they fill the air with enthusiasm. They come from miles around to see the National League's most action-packed team, the Cincinnati Reds.
In replacing many beloved older ballparks, these facilities, despite their many benefits, aroused fan critics, who came to regard them as spaces which lacked intimacy. Teams, as well as fans, also came to realize that in the attempt to accommodate the two sports, both, in the end, were compromised. These innovations of the 1960s and 1970s have proven over time to be failures and have been as rapidly replaced as they were built. As the former Dallas Texans, the AFL brainchild of the visionary entrepreneur Lamar Hunt, the Chiefs initially played their schedules in Kansas City's Municipal Ballpark. Playing the gridiron game in an infrastructure designed for the diamond was never anything but a necessary compromise for the sport. Kansas City's Municipal Stadium was already, by the mid-1960s, facing criticism and reevaluation. Kansas City was at a crossroads, and the city embarked on a bold new plan to develop a dual complex with facilities designed specifically to accommodate each sport. The first dual sport complex in an era overwhelmingly bent on single-venue multipurpose solutions. Arrowhead signaled the dawn of a new era when opened in 1973. Its popularity among the league and with fans helped propel its example of design excellence throughout the world of football. The completion of Joe Robbie Stadium in 1987 brought with it innovations that, like the skyboxes of the Astrodome, created an addition to the architectural vocabulary of sports stadiums that has influenced all succeeding facilities of its scale. For Joe Robbie wanted a standout stadium for his dynasty of perennial contenders. And with luxury suite revenues in mind, his designers innovated the introduction of the club seat level. Using this mezzanine-level seating opportunity as a revenue-generating device, he was able to pull together funds through advanced seat sales that became the linchpin of his financing plan. This intermediate level of luxury seating, bolstered by club lounges and seat-side food service, have become a popular and permanent feature that will continue to leave its mark far into the foreseeable future. Sometimes it takes middle-sized cities and minor league clubs to take the leap of faith associated with experimental ventures. These forces came together in Buffalo, New York, and when Pilot Field opened in 1987, the impact registered in the minds of planners and developers from the big markets and among the many organizations within the majors. For Pilot Field exhibited many of the general elements that would later be expanded to inform a new generation of ballparks. Sensitivity to historic preservation districts, the ever more apparent need to refocus development in disintegrating urban cores, and in developing up-to-date responses to enhancing amenities for fans and players, a benchmark was established. By the time Baltimore's Oriole Park at Camden Yards came online for the 1992 season, it was heralded far and wide that a new era had dawned in baseball. With its now famous warehouse, Camden Yards was the first major league ballpark in decades that drew its inspiration and design impulses by getting in touch with the built environment and cultural heartbeat of a city. Following in the award-winning footsteps of Camden Yards, other cities began to bring ballparks back downtown, sparking revitalizing impacts in both city morale and in business development. Denver's Coors Field, built on a site reclaimed from a defunct rail yard, provided the impetus that launched a turnaround in its lower downtown. What had formerly been a post-industrial warehouse area has become a vibrant restaurant, entertainment, and residential district. The urban planning ramifications had also been fully recognized as Baltimore again took the lead in planning an urban version of the dual sport complex. In response, this trend has been taken up in cities such as Cincinnati and Pittsburgh that demonstrate the wisdom of bringing people back to their historic cores, while also signaling a symbolic retreat from the precipice of suburban sprawl. From 1999 until the year 2005, the United States will witness the completion of yet another generation of state-of-the-art sport facilities. Of this current generation of stadiums and ballparks, several are introducing new approaches to retractable roof systems. The football stadiums especially seek to maximize potential income generation from year-round events to complement its relatively short season. From luxury suites and club levels to improved concourse concessions and an enlarged palette of entertaining activities, these new trends have configured a new landscape of leisure. From the simple rain-deflecting canopies of early grandstands to luxury suites with attendant club lounges, these changing adaptations in design couldn't be more profound or far-reaching. The Smart Stadium. The Smart Stadium, a stadium that converts to football and baseball configurations without compromise. These smart stadiums, in conjunction with intelligent transportation systems, will increase the efficiency of getting masses of people into and out of facilities. E-ticketing and entry will increase the efficiency of horizontal crowd movement while lowering revenue losses associated with inefficient fee collection. The Turf Dome. The Turf Dome features a natural turf pitch on a standard truss system with columns in the four corners of the pitch. This allows the field to be raised to the level of the stadium roof, providing a totally enclosed facility. The analysts of future projections in sports envision fault-tolerant multimedia communication systems. With these systems, virtual connections will be established between the playing field and remote coaching, stadium management and security, and to broad network interfaces that will enable rapid information distribution. This upgrade in automatic information transfer, coupled with audio, video, and projection screen installations, will enhance the graphics and video displays of group viewing, while contributing in an overwhelming way to bringing each spectator closer to the action. The potential is limitless, and only one fact seems certain. Facility developers and operators in the future will spend more on microprocessing software than upon nuts and bolts hardware. And in the world that today's children are dreaming of, we may see innovative strides in the future of sports that change with a few broad strokes the very canvas we know today.